between God and man. Now, there's another one, though, that when it's man making a covenant or an agreement with a fellow man, then it's a different Greek word in the Septuagint that's used. But when it's God, God is the far superior party. And he sets all the terms and the conditions, if there are terms and conditions, and man either obeys or doesn't. But because God is the superior party, then it's not unilateral. Then I believe this is the word the Jews use to differentiate a covenant between man and man. But in any case, I appreciate you using that example because it's extremely important. He said, "This is my blood of the covenant," and it is a covenant that we have in that memory with Jesus Christ and remember his death. I have some things I need to pass out, brothers. If you would help me distribute those tonight, please. There's two. Everybody needs to get one of these. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please go ahead and open to Daniel. We'll be studying from Daniel. As I mentioned, Brother Dan, I'm sure, will want to do his own introduction to the book of Daniel. I insist on it if I'm going to teach a book. But I want to give tonight just a brief historical sketch of events leading up to the book. And in particular, if we have time, I want to look at some of the teaching in that very, very important second chapter, which is the foundation of chapters 7 through the rest of the book, really. It provides a skeleton, it provides the bones, the skeleton, for what he says in what we call the apocalyptic section or prophetic section. And then in chapters 6 through 12, Daniel will put meat on the bones. So we have basic information in chapter 2, and then we have the details that will be given in chapter 6 through the rest of the book. Appreciate our brothers leading us tonight. They always are prepared and have edifying, uplifting things to say. Thank you, brothers, very much for doing that. It is Dathake for God. I appreciate it. Thank you. So that is the word that's between God and man. Dathake. And I don't even think Sunthake is used that much. I think it's mainly Dathake. Okay, all those who have the handout, look with me at the heading, Historical Sketch for Daniel, please. Historical Sketch for Daniel. And number 1 there. So from the split of the 12 tribes of Israel, during Rehoboam's reign, Solomon's son, to the coming of the Christ, there are 6 great earthly kingdoms involved in Israel's history. Were there other nations and kingdoms on the earth during that time? Of course. But these 6 are mentioned because they are relevant to Israel's history, events in Israel. They have a bearing on God's covenant people, Israel. Now, what are those 6 kingdoms? Well, obviously Assyria. Our brother Adam has been teaching us in the Minor Prophets. A lot is said about the nation of Assyria. And so we've learned a lot of things biblically, historically, from our brother on this nation, what God had to say about them and Israel's dealings with them. Now, they're not mentioned, but obviously Babylon will be mentioned in the book of Daniel from the very first chapter. And then someone read in chapter 6 of Daniel and verse 8. Chapter 6 and verse 8, please. 6 and verse 8. Anyone would like to read that?
Now, okay, establish the injunction which signed the document, so that it cannot be changed according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, it cannot be revoked.
The Medes and the Persians. The book of Daniel will actually present, there's two different peoples here, but they will be presented actually as one great kingdom, with the Persians being the dominant kingdom, because they had subjugated the Medians. The Medians and the Persians came together to conquer the Babylonians in chapter 5. It was the Medians and the Babylonians against the Assyrians, as we learned. But the Medians will be subjugated by Cyrus the Persian and come against Babylon, and they're mentioned here in the book of Daniel. So you have the Medes and the Persians. And then what about chapter 8, verse 21? Someone read chapter 8, verse 21. That's a good one too, brother. Chapter 8:21.
The goat is the kingdom of Greece, and the powerful horn between its eyes is the first of its kings.
Okay, thanks. So you have this statue, amazing statue given in a dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And in chapters 7 and 8, it will be portrayed, the various parts of that statue, some of them portrayed as animals. And so in chapter 7, the Persian and the Median Empire will be pictured as a bear raised up on one side, because again, the Persians are dominant of the two. And then in chapter 8, anyone know how they're portrayed in chapter 8 of the book of Daniel? As a ram. So it will be the silver portion, but it's portrayed as a ram in chapter 8 with two horns, but one horn is higher than the other. Again, the Persians more dominant of the two. So we got Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, and this last empire is alluded to. It's not named, but it is alluded to, which is amazing, because it's way out there. It's hundreds of years yet to come. And what is the other empire? It's Rome. How is it portrayed in chapter 7? Anybody know? In chapter 7 of Daniel, it will be, we can go ahead and look at it. Chapter 7 of Daniel, and look at verse 8. Let's see, is that the one I want? I don't think it is. No, chapter 7, verse 7. How is this empire portrayed? What's the picture? Dreadful, terrifying beast, and it's just destroying everything in its path. It's the next one in line, and it will be the part of the statue we're going to see his legs of iron, feet partly of iron and clay. I'm convinced he's talking about Rome, and it was indeed more powerful than any of the others that went before. So you have, Babylon, you have Persia, you have Greece that are specifically mentioned, and then Rome, I think, alluded to, which is quite amazing, I think. Number 2 on the historical sketch for Daniel, from 800 to 745 BC. Now, this is a fact brought out by Cunningham Geikie in his volume 4, Hours with the Bible. But he makes this statement. He said, Assyria during this time period was torn with internal strife by wars with revolting provinces, which as Adam brought out in his class, that distraction, that internal distraction that Assyria was having allowed Israel and Judah an opportunity to prosper and to extend their borders during the time of Jonah. Now, how did that make Jonah feel? It's like, this is great. You know, thank you for this. They're built, even though the king of Israel was a wicked man, God was very gracious, allowing this to happen. Jonah's a zealous patriot. He knows what Assyria is all about, and he doesn't want them to prosper. He wants them to be destroyed because he knows what they'll do to his own people. He's very, very happy about their advance, their extension here of their borders. So the next point, Jonah rejoiced in Israel's temporary security, but knew the Assyrian threat was looming. And of course, eventually they would destroy his nation in 722. So number 5, Assyria's subjugation of Israel and Judah began with the reign of Tiglath-Pileser, sometimes known as Pul. His reign is 745 to 727. And then from 760 to 722, the prophets Hosea, Amos, Micah, Isaiah warn Israel of destruction from Assyria if they do not repent. And of course, they do not repent. Number 7, 725 BC, Shalmaneser V besieges Samaria, Israel's capital city. Now, somewhere, though, in that besiegement, he dies. And the job is finished by his brother. This is number 8, Sargon II. And then number 9, 705 BC, and some would say that Sargon killed his own brother. Number 9, 705 BC, Sargon dies. His son Sennacherib reigns in his place. Judah and Egypt rebelled, refused to pay tribute. Doesn't make Sennacherib very happy. Number 10, 701 BC, Sennacherib invades Judah. He destroys, and that's in the Bible, there's the passage, 46 Judean cities, many villages, and he enslaves over 200,000 Judean people. 2 Kings 18. Well, obviously Hezekiah, who's reigning in Judah, fears the same thing for Judah. But what does he do different from the other cities? What does Hezekiah do that's different? He prays to God. He prays that God would save them. God is very gracious, and God answers his prayer, and a host of angels appear and destroy the Assyrian army. How many angels did it take? Just one. Just one. And how many did they kill? Bible gives the number 185,000. Imagine what a host of angels could do if one can do that. It's quite an amazing read. So number 12, Sennacherib returns home. 20 years later, he's assassinated by his own sons. No love lost there. On the back of your sheet, number 13, 663, 612, the prophet Nahum declares Nineveh's destruction. 612, Nineveh's fall. The father of Nebuchadnezzar, Nabopolassar of Babylon. Now, this is the new Babylonian Kingdom. Nabopolassar and Xerxes of the Medes lead the conquest against Nineveh. So you got the Medes and the Babylons working together at this point in time against the Assyrians, and later it will be the Medes and the Persians against Babylon in 539. So number 15 here, 609 BC, the complete destruction of Assyria by the Babylonians and the Medes. The Medes moved on into Asia Minor, gained all the territory east of the Halys River. Nabopolassar of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's father, claimed all the territory formerly under the tribute to the Assyrians. In 609 BC, Jehoiakim now becomes subject to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. It's in 2 Kings 24. And then number 17, in 606, 605 BC, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar defeat the Egyptians at the old city of Carchemish. Soon afterwards, Nebuchadnezzar receives word of his father's death. And so he hurries back to Babylon to claim the throne, orders his army to bring back captives from Egypt and all these countries that are now under their control, which would include Judah. And in that first captivity, who are among those that they bring back into Babylon? The princes, the royalty, those that have the brains, supposedly, and who might be a threat in trying to usurp rule away from their subjugation to the Babylonians. So among those would be Daniel and, of course, his three friends during this time period, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they're taken in that first subjugation of Nebuchadnezzar in about 606, 605. Now, just kind of some interesting things there. I love things like this. But to the left at the bottom of that page, that's a Babylonian tablet relating Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Judah and the siege and surrender of Jerusalem. It's in the British Museum. It is 8.25 centimeters by 6.19 centimeters, which to us would be 3¼ inches by 2 7/16 inches. Very small. Can you imagine that's your writing material and you put all of that on that clay tablet? 3 by 2 inches. And then to the right is an actual image of Nebuchadnezzar, face only a mother could love. And on the walls, one of the walls of Babylon, this is some of the writing that they have found. Kings love to talk about themselves and their victories and all the good things that they've done. Nebuchadnezzar is no exception. So this is one of the things he had inscribed on one of the walls. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, son of Nabopolassar, am I. That no powerful enemy and destroyer might take Babylon, that the line of battle might not approach Imgur-Bel, the wall of Babylon, that which no former king had done, I did at the enclosure of Babylon. So he's saying basically, I fortified the walls that my father built. I wanted us to be invincible. And he thought they were invincible. And except for God's providence, they probably would not have been taken. It's an interesting story as to how they finally were subdued. You've probably already read it, but if you haven't, it's extremely interesting how the Babylonian Empire was conquered. At the very bottom of that inscription, he says, I strengthen and establish this so that my reign would be forever. Or so he thought. Now, did he reign? Did Nebuchadnezzar reign a long time? Yes, he did. Of the 87 years, if you date, what did I do with the marker? Here it is. If you date the kingdom, the Neo-Babylonian Kingdom. Of course, Babylon goes back to Genesis 11. This is the new Babylonian Kingdom from Nabopolassar on, from 626 to 539. So 87 years. And Nebuchadnezzar reigned 44 of those 87. He's a very successful, very powerful king. And God allowed him to reign a long, long time. Okay, look at Hebrews 1 now with me. Hebrews 1. Check our time. Hebrews 1 and verse 1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us through his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. So both testaments, Old and New, were not revealed all at once, but in portions and in various ways. Now, one of the ways God revealed his will to man is in the form of dreams. And sometimes God would reveal his will and purpose to even a Gentile man, a pagan. Now, that pagan, that Gentile, didn't understand the dream. He needed help with the explanation. And that's where men like Joseph come in, you see. And his place is established in Egypt that way with the Pharaoh. And that's how Daniel's place, you see, is established with Nebuchadnezzar. God troubled this powerful king with dreams, troubled him. So much so he was ready to destroy all the wise men in the kingdom if they couldn't tell him the dreams and the interpretation. Well, of course, Daniel comes to the forefront very, very early in his career as one of the wise men in Babylon, he and his friends. And this was God's way of having his man in Babylon. He had Ezekiel in the second captivity with the captives by the river Kibar. That's his man there. He had Daniel in Babylon with the king's ear. And he had, of course, Jeremiah still with the people in Jerusalem. God had his man everywhere. And he's establishing Daniel as his representative there in Babylon very, very early. And so the king has these dreams. He's troubled by them. None of his so-called wise men and counselors could give him the dreams or the interpretation. We're going to have to come in the middle because of time. So eventually, Daniel he asked Arioch, the king's servant, if he'd be given the opportunity to pray to his God and learn what the dreams and the interpretation were. Well, God answers him, and look at chapter 2 now. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 19. And we'll begin reading there, 2:19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel, chapter 2, verse 19, brother. Daniel. Yes, sir. Sorry, I didn't make that clear, did I? Chapter 2, verse 19. Okay, so let's start again. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And verse 20 through 23, this is Daniel exalting and praising God for revealing these things. Not only that, but saving his life because they're ready to kill him. The king is ready to kill all the wise men. Verse 20, Daniel answered and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings, and this is a very important statement. He removes kings, he establishes kings. He removes presidents, he establishes presidents. He removes rulers of whatever sort, and he can establish them. That is God's power and wisdom. He gives wisdom to wise men, knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To thee, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for thou hast given me wisdom and power. Even now thou hast made known to me what we requested of thee, for thou hast made known to us the king's matter. So Daniel tells Arioch, the captain's servant, my God has given to me the dream. He's revealed it to me. Take me to the king. So Arioch hurriedly takes Daniel to King Nebuchadnezzar. And so the king then says in verse 26, Daniel 2, verse 26, Daniel, are you able to make known to me the dream which I've seen and its interpretation? And Daniel then quickly says, no, can't do that. It is not within me to do anything like that. However, he says, chapter 2, he says in verse 28, there is a God in heaven. So Nebuchadnezzar begins to learn more about Daniel's God. And eventually he'll learn quite a bit. There's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he's made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. So whatever the meaning is, when will it happen? When will it take place? It's got to happen in the last days. That's why, brethren, you look at chapter 12, look at Daniel 12 and verse 4. Like somebody read chapter 12 and verse 4.
But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase.
Okay. And so he says, first of all, he says, seal up the book. Does that fit with the idea of latter days? It's not going to happen till many years away. And so seal it up. Now, as John concludes the Revelation letter, what does God tell the Apostle John at the end of the Revelation letter? Don't seal it up. Why? Because these things are to shortly take place. He tells you that from the very beginning in chapter 1, verse 3. They will shortly happen. They'll shortly take place. And so, contrary to the premillennial idea that this is all this yet to happen, and it's going to be some kind of literal fulfillment in Jerusalem with the tribes receiving their identity once again and so on and so forth. John says it's soon to occur, and so don't seal up the book. God tells John that. Now this one, though, he says seal it up because it's something that will happen in the latter days. Now while you're there in that verse, you know, Eddie, I read typically from a New American Standard, and some of you may have a New American Standard. It says the end of time, and that's not what the original is. There's a bias there for whatever reason. And the original Hebrew, the Septuagint, all other standard translations I'm aware of, state it, translate it the way it should be, and that is the time of the end. Big difference. End of time, time of the end. Because the time of the end he's talking about is very different. And we're reading about some of that in the Gospel of Matthew. But the time of the end, which will be the end of God's special covenant relationship with Israel, that's going to happen. But it's going to be hundreds of years from the time God is now revealing these things. Well, let's go back to Daniel chapter 2, Daniel 2, and verse 29. Daniel relates the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. 2:29. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king so that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. God is being very gracious to you, and I'm his instrument. Understand that, king. So verse 31, so he says that twice. Verse 31, you, O king, here's your dream. You were looking, behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron, partly of clay. So how many materials are here? How many materials? We got gold. We got what? Silver. We got bronze. We got iron. Okay, so how many? 5. Now there will be how many kingdoms? There'll be 4 kingdoms, but you've got 5 materials because these two are going to go together. At the feet of iron and clay. They're not mixing. And so that's the dream. And then look at verse 34. He continues with the dream. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and crushed them, pulverized them, really, is the idea. Verse 35 showed complete dominance. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff, which the summer threshing floors, from the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the entire earth. Now that is the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar, is just sitting there and he's just in amazement because that's exactly what he dreamed. All he can say or do is just nod his head. That's it exactly. And so he's on, you'd think at that point, all ears now, go on. What else can you tell me? If you can tell me the dream, then you have just gained tremendous credibility. I'm ready for the interpretation. Whatever your God has revealed to you, he's ready now for that. Daniel's already established his credentials and credibility as a servant of this great God. And so here's the interpretation that he hears. Verse 36, this was the dream. Now we should tell its interpretation before the king. And I thank God that we don't have to speculate as to what it means. Right? Our God in heaven has graciously revealed the interpretation of this marvelous dream. Verse 37, you, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. Wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, he's given them into your hand. He's caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So we've got Babylon. We've got Babylon, here. I think something I'd like, this is the way I do this chart. So you've got this statue. I'm terrible at drawing here. So you've got this statue and you've got the head identified and the chest and the belly and the thighs and legs and so on. But what I want people to understand is just lay that thing out because it's really a timeline of history. Just lay it down. We typically think of things like this, but lay it down because what you've got is you've got Babylon, and the time period would be 626 to 539. So you've got that head of gold. And what would be the next great empire after Babylon? Eastern. Who would that be? That conquered Babylon. Who conquered Babylon? All right, the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Persians and the Medeans, and you've got them from about 539, let's say 331. And so they would be, so you got gold here, you've got the silver here, and you continue the timeline of history. The next one would be bronze. And who would they be? Who are the next ones after the Persians and the Medes? They hated the Persians. And the Persians hated them. But the Greeks, and so 331, let's say to 63 BC. And who comes in around 63 BC establishing their dominance? And they're the iron and feet partly of iron and clay. That would be Rome. And so from about 63 BC to a long time, around 476, finally AD, 500 years, you've got an empire here. You've got the Roman Empire. So, you think of it like this, but I think it's easier if you just lay it down. And you can see, well, that's really just a timeline of history. One kingdom coming right after the other. But at the time we read the book of Daniel, this is the kingdom that's in power, the Babylonian Kingdom. And Daniel is, let's look back at the text here for just a moment. He's going to say that in, let's see, verse 39, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then another kingdom of bronze, and then verse 40, a fourth kingdom as strong as iron and clay. Now, look at verse 44. We're going to go ahead and because of time, have to skip down there. And in the days of those kings, those, a pronoun, you've got to have an antecedent. Who are the kings he's just been talking about? In the days of those kings, verse 44. Has he been talking about the Babylonian kings, the Persian kings, the Greek kings, or the kings of the fourth part of the statute? I believe he's talking about the Roman kings. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. I wish we had another hour because I'd love to talk to you about some of the details of this kingdom. Where did that stone in particular strike that statue? There's a reason, there's a chronology to all of these materials. There's a chronology. I want you to see that. So you got the head of gold. Did the stone strike the head when it was cut out? Didn't strike the head. Did it strike the chest? Did it strike the chest? Did it strike the belly? The legs? No, it did not strike the legs. It struck the feet. Why did that stone cut out without hands, of no human origin, of divine origin? Why did it strike the feet? What's the message there? There's something very special there. What does that stone represent? Anybody know? I'm going to have to just ask here because our time is running out. What is that?
It represents, the kingdom of Christ. It happened during the Roman Empire.
Yes, it was during the time of the legs, but in particular the feet and the clay. Now, the thing to look at is, what is the clay? There would be a mixture, but then there would be a division as well. What is the clay that, I believe there's intermarriage going on between the seed of the Romans and this other nationality, but there's also great division. I believe so, brother. I believe it is the Jewish people. And that stone cut without hands is the Lord Jesus Christ himself, the stone which the builders rejected, Matthew 21. And the Jews stumbled over it. And Jesus said, whoever stumbles over me, he said, they're going to be crushed. They're going to be crushed. In particular, I think it's a time period when that division between that lack of mixture between the Jews and the Romans is going to be at its zenith. And what happened between 66 and 70 AD? Wars between the Jewish people and the Roman people. But that's, the kingdom began, during this time period. It began in Acts chapter 2. Jesus was established as sovereign ruler and king. And you had mixture between the Jews and the Romans, but you also had division. Remember what Pilate did? Look at Luke chapter 13 real quick, if you may. Luke chapter 13. Yes. In Luke 13, you had Pilate, who was ruler of Judea at that time, and the Jews hate him. Of course, he feels the same about them. Chapter 13 says, now on the same occasion, there were some present who reported to him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. He answered and said, do you suppose these Galileans were any greater sinners than all Galileans, Jews, because they suffered this fate? I tell you, no, unless you repent, you're all going to likewise perish. And so, there was definitely a rift, a division between them. And it's only going to escalate and get worse. I believe that stone cut out without hands, that's the Lord establishing his kingdom. And it's his sovereignty will be established over the whole world and really over everyone and everything, not just this world, but everyone and everything. And that in particular, it hit the feet. That's the chronology of when his kingdom began. When there was a mingling of the seed, but also a division between the Roman Empire and this people. And that's when God says it's all going to come down. It's all going to happen. Well, our brother Dan will do a great job as usual, I'm sure, in teaching Daniel, and we'll get more into these things later on. The other chart, I always come with more than I need to. Yes, sir.
You might add about this idea of mixing the iron and the clay,
Yeah.
that they joined together to
Mhm.
crucify Jesus.
That's good. A strong point really needs, and actually, I wanted to bring that out. If you read Psalm 2, it will talk about how, various peoples joined together against the Lord's anointed. And we know that was Pilate as well as the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They joined together. So there was a joining there, but yet there was a division as well between them. Psalm 2. And that truly happened. Well, thank you for studying these things with me. I appreciate that. Any questions? If you want to really get into it, let's get into it privately. But for right now, we're going to have to stop. And so let's have a word of prayer. And who can I call on here to do that? Who's willing to do that? Mason, would you like to lead a word of prayer? Would you? Okay. We'll be dismissed with this prayer.
Another time you give us to come here and learn about your word. We ask you to please with us to study Daniel, to learn all the things we learn. Thank you for letting us all be here safely and not just to get on to.
Amen. Thank you, brother.